So that is going to be the highlight of this session. And I would like to welcome two special guests for us. One is Dr. Y.L. Rajshekhar, our beloved president of Karnataka Ophthalmic Society. We're extremely glad to have you here, sir. And I sincerely thank you on behalf of our Manual Small Incision Cataract Society for allowing to use the YouTube link of Karnataka Ophthalmic Society. You have been so gracious and helpful in arranging this link. We are still learning all the nuts and bolts of this nitty-gritty of this connection. So thank you for helping me out.
Sure.
And we're honored to have you at this meeting.
Thank you so much.
I would like to, I will ask you to say a few words. Before that, I'd like also to welcome Dr. Anil Shah, a special guest for our meeting today. We all know him that he's one of the most brilliant and innovative surgeon. He has been practicing. He has innovated the snare. He's using this for the last maybe 20 years now. And we see his videos regularly. He is a brilliant surgeon and an original thinker. And we're very honored to have you. And he'll share his views on managing post-polar cataracts. Before we start the session, I would request Dr. Rajshekhar to share a few of his thoughts and words for today's meeting. Sir.
Thank you, Dr. Deepak. Respected faculty and dear colleagues who have joined. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be amidst all of you. And I must thank your society and the initiative of all of you to have the program relayed live on YouTube. There are more than 2,000 KOS members, out of which 350 members are subscribers who are good users of this. And this program, entire program will be available later also for them to view on the KOS website. Coming to SICS itself, I would like to just say a word. Recently, I was talking to some insurance companies. They were asking me whether phaco emulsification is better or SICS is better, and which one should be charge comparisons. When we were going in detail, the result at the end of the discussion, I could convince him that in SICS, results will be equally good, but they have not recognized the skill of the surgeon, because at a point a discussion came about which is more skillful and which is more reproducible kind of a thing. The skill of SICS surgeon is definitely much higher than that of a comparison came where you landing an aeroplane with autopilot mode or doing it manually. And when both can be equally smooth, definitely a pilot who can land it manually is more skilled. So SICS is one such. And during COVID time, we had a webinar which ran into nearly 4.5 years at international level, with Indian surgeons shining and many foreigners and others learning from Indian surgeons. Most of the people realized that we should innovate cataract surgery to a new level, where it becomes more affordable, more independent of missionaries. Like, you know, the more equipments that you bring in, the more cost. And if you can deliver results with equally good techniques, then we should be looking at that. Unfortunately, as MSR sir keeps saying, the industry drive is not there behind SICS, because it's the surgeons we have to drive. And in this respect, this initiative is great. And every Thursday, Learning with Masters series, we thought we'll name it as Learning with Masters series. It's a great evening learning and a lot of exchange of ideas. I'm thankful for the spirit of sharing knowledge that's very unique to our country, where surgeons who have that skill and blessed with so much of knowledge come forward to spare their time in teaching the next generation. With these few words, I'm happy that such programs are going on, and more so from Karnataka. That's happy news. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Deepak, and the dignitaries here.
Thank you, Dr. Rajshekhar, sir. I think we owe you a lot for helping us out with this live streaming event today. Thank you so much. Now, moving on to the session today, I think our first speaker would be Dr. Sundaram Shetty, sir, and he will be speaking on his tips on managing post-polar cataracts. Before he starts screen sharing, sir, you can begin your screen sharing. I think we really have undervalued the utility of the manual small incision cataract surgery, especially in post-polar cataract management. If there is one scenario where the manual small incision cataract surgery distinctly scores over phacoemulsification, is this is one such scenario where we don't have to change many things. We do have to change some things, but definitely the amount of safety it adds to fall while performing surgery on post-polar cataracts is significantly more when compared to phacoemulsification. But unfortunately and sadly, I must say that this aspect is not highlighted in many of your academic events. So today we'll try to learn what are the few tricks which can enhance the safety in this type of cases. Over to you, sir. You're unmuted, sir. Sir, you're unmuted. Shetty, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Posterior polar cataract was a nightmare for a cataract surgeon for a long time. In our earlier days, we never used to touch posterior polar cataract simply because we were not used to removing transparent lens material. And also, this cataract happens in young people. If you adventurously go and remove this cataract, patient is left with no accommodation. And that's why we used to do very weak mydriatic drops and manage so that we can postpone the surgery and the patient can see from the peripheral clear lens. That used to be the days when we started, and we used to leave the eye aphakic. It further used to be a handicap for life. So this post-polar cataract could be with a pre-existing post-capsular dehiscence, and or it could be without post-capsular dehiscence. And in such cases, we must try and save the PC so that we modify the technique such a way that we do not cause too much stress on the posterior capsule and lose the posterior capsule in the process. So if posterior capsule is already absent, or meaning there is a dehiscence in the posterior capsule, our attempt should be to try and avoid vitreous disturbance. Try and save the intravitreous phase. So in diagnosing the dehiscence, existence of the dehiscence, or if it is dense posterior subcapsular cataract, or it's a true posterior polar cataract, we can even use these steps in examination, like the history. Sometimes a recent onset posterior polar like opacity may not be the true posterior polar cataract, because posterior polar cataract starts from a very early age. And proper slit lamp examination and inter-segment OCT or B scan, particularly so if the cataract is in young patient mature cataract, one should be cautious as to rule out the posterior polar cataract. So my concern would be in a posterior polar cataract, the posterior capsule may rupture without vitreous disturbance. There could be a nucleus drop in case if it is a mature cataract, I missed out on the posterior capsule or dehiscence, and I do a proper hydrodissection or a forceful hydrodissection, and I land up losing the posterior capsule and nucleus may suddenly drop. And difficulty in removing the lens matter, if particularly so if there is a posterocapsular dehiscence. And I have to also plan on the IOL, whether to put a single piece lens or a 3-piece lens. So in management, so uh, there are few modifications from the usual we do or take care of in dealing with posterior polar cataract. So people don't talk so much about it now. One time, is to consider preoperative IOP reduction by maybe giving Diamox or intravenous mannitol to shrink the vitreous gel so that the pressure on the posterior capsule from behind will be reduced. And you have to keep the vitrectomy ready and triamcinolone acetonide handy, because any step of the procedure, the posterior capsule may give way and we may have to deal with the vitreous. Keep 3-piece IOL also standby. If you are able to retain the posterior capsule intact, we can put the lens in the bag. Otherwise, preferred lens is 3-piece lens with the optic capture. And we have to do some modifications in the surgical technique, which we will discuss now. So capsulorhexis, 5mm capsulorhexis is very important because we may need to capture the optic in case there is a dehiscence in the posterior capsule or a posterior capsular tear, and the slightly on the smaller side size rhexis comes handy. And do not pressurize the anterior chamber too much, so that the posterior capsule is not stressed. And of course it will come for further discussion about the hydrodissection, but personally I do hydrodelamination first and deliver the endonucleus into the anterior chamber and deliver it from the eye, and then go in for the separation of the epinucleus from the cortex, and then remove that and then go for the cortex. So do not let the entire chamber collapse throughout the procedure. In a sense, there should not be a up and down pressure change in the entire chamber, which will keep on stressing the posterior capsule, which is, even if there is no dehiscence, it is going definitely a weak posterior capsule, which we have to respect. So separate, as I said, epinucleus from cortex through visco or hydrodissection. Visco dissection is also good against hydro because you can control the separation, the speed of separation. It could be slow and controlled as against hydrodissection. So the epinucleus is a challenge in case of when you are doing SSCS, because our irrigation aspiration cannula is very small, has a small aspiration port, but it could be achieved with the help of the by practice, I would say, because we do not have the bimanual, or probably if you use phaco irrigation aspiration bimanually, the other the irrigating cannula can help allow the epinuclear matter to go into the aspiration port. After removing the epinucleus, then separate the cortex all around from the equator before starting the aspiration of the cortex, meaning keep on pulling at the cortex and separate it from the equator all around, and it will start crumbling into the center. Once you have achieved that, then you try to separate it from the posterior pole. So finally separate the cortex attachment to the posterior pole and aspirate the cortex. So if we have more than 90% of the times, we succeed in saving the PC from a tear. So if we achieve that, then we put the IOL in the bag. But this PC tear can happen at any step because of different factors. As the discussions go on, people have different theories and hypotheses about how this PC tear happen. So, but we all know that PC tear does happen more often in a PPC than a normal cataract. So deal with it accordingly. We have had a long 2 sessions on this, so we all know how to deal with the PC tear and vitreous in the anterior chamber. And since the young, these posterior polar cataracts are seen in young patients with gel vitreous, it is relatively easy to handle. And if we are lucky, even the hyaloid membrane may be intact, so that there may not be a disturbance of vitreous, though there is a tear in the posterior capsule. So this nucleus drop also can happen in posterior polar cataract, particularly so if the cataract is mature in a young patient. So be aware of this possibility. So do a proper examination and think the tests like intersegment OCT or the B scan to at least get an idea of the status of the posterior capsule before we proceed with cataract surgery in young patients who have a mature cataract. So the preoperative assessment is the most important factor there. So here is a posterior polar cataract. I was looking around searching for a posterior polar cataract done with manual SSCS, but I couldn't find it. But the steps I have been describing here, they all are there in this. So, and I assure you, I did not use any phaco energy here. I was only using the aspiration of the phaco. So after seeing this, it is occurring to me that we should devise a cannula with a wide bore to aspirate this epinuclear shell in manual SCCS instead of this, Simcoe irrigation aspiration cannula, which is a very small aspiration port. So a robust, about 5 millimeter capsular axis is very important. So take time to do this and ensure. And it sometimes can be little difficult because the cortex is very soft. So if the forceps are not, the cystotome is not helping, then you can complete it with the help of the forceps. And you have to bury the irrigation cannula through the soft cortex and go to the epinuclear level and do the hydrodelamination. So usually the soft, the endonucleus pops out, and it has to be aspirated out first so that the epinuclear shell will be left behind along with the cortex, and which doesn't have the support in the center, so it easily buckles in, and we can aspirate the whole thing out as much as with the main port, and then we try from the side port. If you use this bimanual irrigation aspiration, the second that irrigating cannula can be of good help to push this cortex into this one. So one point here is actually instead of catching the epinucleus, cortex and pull it brings in the epinucleus from the equatorial region towards the center. Then it becomes easier to aspirate the epinucleus. So go all round and separate it from the equatorial region first, then separate the cortex from the posterior pole region. Once this thing is aspirated, of course, here I could save the posterior capsule, so I am able to put the lens in the bag. All the steps are same like manual SSCS, except that aspiration, which is a little bit of a struggle in SSCS, but we have this visco expression can be achieved, done and achieve the same goal. Thank you very much. Deepak, unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. May I invite Dr. Anil Shah to start his screen sharing? He's going to share his few practical tips on what are his major concerns while planning an SICS and how does he handle it. Dr. Anil Shah, sir, you unmute yourself and start screening your screen.
Good evening, everybody. Top tips on managing the posterior polar cataract with manual small incision cataract surgery. I am Dr. Anil Shah from Suryakant Eye Hospital, Nandurbar. I am thankful to the President, Secretary, member of Karnataka Ophthalmological Society, Dr. Deepak Megur, Dr. M.S. Ravindra, and all the members for giving me an opportunity to express my view on this topic. Now, what is the importance of posterior polar cataract? Why it is so different from routine cataract? Because there are very high risk of intraoperative PC rent. And it is also associated with various ocular anomalies like microophthalmos, microcornea, anterior cataract, and there are so many systemic anomalies which are associated with the posterior polar cataract. A PC rent is a dreaded complication which every ophthalmologist has to face in his life. Anterior chamber is like a garden. We are freely moving, enjoying the garden, and posterior chamber is like a Jurassic Park, which is full of all the animals, dreaded animals, and they are just sleeping. But once the PC rent occurs, and once the communication is established between anterior chamber and posterior chamber, the vitreous acts as an octopus, and it starts eating its own eye. And there are n number of complications which can occur and which makes the ophthalmologist sleepless night. Life of an ophthalmologist is like a snake ladder pattern. He daily achieves some goals, he goes upward, and at one particular time, something goes wrong like PC tear, and he again come down, and his all the goals are again vanished. So how to avoid this headache? Counseling of relative is more important than patient. In this type of cases, relatives after some complication occurs come to you and then fight with you. So it is better that the relatives should be properly explained that this cataract is entirely different from routine cataract. Inform them about the possibility of PC rent, inform them about the possibility of nucleus drop, relative long intraoperative time. Second surgery may be required and there may be a chance of delayed visual recovery. Posterior polar cataract and posterior subcapsular cataract. These are two commonly seen cataracts and every posterior subcapsular cataract is considered as a posterior polar cataract unless it is properly evaluated. And many a times we are lucky that 90%, 95% of the posterior polar cataract turn out to be posterior subcapsular cataract, and we are able to easily do the surgery and easily implant the IOL. Now, a typical posterior polar cataract is a dense circular plaque in the center of the posterior part of the lens. It is a bull's eye or onion peel appearance. This is described by Dr. Daljit Singh. It looks like a degenerated lens matter surrounded by vacuoles. Anterior vitreous looks like a droplet or a particle. These are the various pictures showing posterior polar cataract. We get a variety of type of posterior polar cataract, and we have to differentiate it from posterior subcapsular cataract. Now, a preoperative evaluation is very important in this type of patient. You should do a careful slit lamp examination and differentiate between the posterior polar cataract and posterior subcapsular cataract. White crystalline deposit on the anterior vitreous fishtail sign indicates that there is a defect in the PC. And around the PC defect, there are small lens like satellite are seen. Now you have to choose a different surgical technique. It is a different cataract, so the surgical technique is also different. Here anesthesia is main important role. Do not do under topical anesthesia, but do all these cases under peribulbar anesthesia, because it may take a longer time. There may be a vitreous loss, and there may be other complications which are easy to manage with peribulbar block rather than topical anesthesia. There are three common techniques which are available for us: extracapsular cataract surgery, phaco, and manual small incision cataract surgery. Now, choosing surgical technique is very important in this type of cases. Extracapsular cataract surgery is not recommended because it is an open chamber technique. There is a forward bulging of PC, so there is a high chance of PC rent. Phaco is okay, but is not preferred because it is a closed chamber technique. There is a high inflow of fluid, high outflow of fluid. Pressure fluctuation is also there, and PC is also stretched, and it can cause rent. But a manual small incision cataract surgery is most preferred technique because it is a partly open and partly closed technique. There is low fluid, low inflow of fluid, low outflow of fluid, no pressure fluctuation, PC is flat, there is no stretch on the PC, so there is minimum chance of PC rent. Now you have to modify each surgical technique during this cataract. When you do a capsulorhexis, use high viscosity viscoelastic in all these patients like sodium hyaluronate or chondroitin sulfate. Use a small rhexis for soft cataract so that you can implant the IOL if PC rent occurs. If there is a large rhexis is to be performed in hard cataract, this prevents fluid buildup in the back. And if PC rupture occurs, the nucleus can be prolapsed into the AC and it can be removed. Now, management of AC anterior chamber is very important. Keep the AC stable throughout the surgery. While removing any instrument, use viscoelastic to form the chamber. BSS flow should be very low. Bottle height should be less than 50 millimeter. Bimanual aspiration, irrigation aspiration with low vacuum less than 150 millimeter is preferred, and flow rate should be less than 20 per minute. Now, when you do hydro procedures, never do hydro dissection in this type of patient. You may blow out the posterior capsule and nucleus may drop. So a controlled hydro delineation to separate nucleus from the epinucleus. Inside out hydro delineation is recommended by Dr. Vasavada, so that a step-by-step from inside nucleus core and then epinucleus is separated, and there is less chances of damaging the posterior capsule. The most important thing is epinucleus removal. It is the most dangerous step. Peripheral part is first loosened, then it is engaged and then it is removed. Central plaque of the epinucleus and cortex is removed at the end. Keep the chamber formed with a visco before removing any instrument. Always form the AC with any viscoelastic, but keep it formed. Bimanual irrigation aspiration is better than other methods like Simcoe cannula or by direct aspiration with the cannula, because bimanual has got a less turbulence and it keeps the chamber formed throughout the surgery. You have to keep vitrectomy machine ready. Standby is must. This is a method of removing the epinucleus. Epinucleus is loosened, then it is aspirated with the cannula, and the central part of the posterior polar cataract is removed at the end. Never remove the central part first, remove from the periphery and then go to the center. Now there are various techniques available in manual small incision cataract surgery, such as blue menthol technique, visco expression technique. But I don't recommend these two techniques because there are many fluctuations in the anterior chamber and that can cause damage to the posterior capsule and can produce a rent. So prefer Vectis, sandwich technique or snare technique because the manipulations are done in the anterior chamber with minimum fluctuation and damage to the posterior capsule is also minimum. Now, here I am frankly telling my personal tip. I am working in a very remote Adivasi area. My patients are very poor and illiterate. My patients don't want any complication when they pay. VR surgery is 200 kilometers away from my place. So I always prefer to refer this type of patient to institute. I don't want to spoil my reputation. So my suggestion is that if you don't have a VR surgeon in your town, then keep quiet, don't do this type of cases. Enjoy stress-free life, tension-free life. Thank you very much for your kind attention, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anisha. Your conclusion was remarkable. Very practical tip. We'll have a lot of discussion. And may I request Dr. M.S. Ravindra sir to start his presentation?
Yeah, can you unshare Dr. Anil Shah?
Yes, sir. Okay. बंद कर दो. Mute करो.
This thing is not coming.
In the meanwhile, I'll request all the participants, if they have any questions, to start noting them in the chat box. We'll try to come to them at the later stage.
కంపెనీ నుంచి ఒకసారి తీసుకున్నట్టు 50,000 బ్యాగులు 60,000 బ్యాగులు తీసుకొని అన్ని అవుట్లెట్లు పెడతారు. ఇలా తెచ్చుకున్న 10 బ్యాగులు
Some problems.
What's the problem? You can just.
I'm not getting my file. You can ask some questions in the meantime.
Okay.
Because I'm checking in from another computer.
Okay, sir. In the meanwhile, should I present my presentation?
You should go ahead till I sort it out.
Okay. So I think Dr. MSR sir is having finding his file. In the meanwhile, I think I'll start my presentation.
Is that visible now?
Just a second, sir.
Was it visible?
No, I think you can start sharing it. It's your screen is not shared now.
My usual screen has disappeared. Is that visible now?
Yeah, it's visible, sir. Now you can go ahead.
There's a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah, I'm just checking and blocking them, sir.
Fine. We had wonderful two presentations just now, and a couple of things both of them said is do not do hydrodissection in such cases. I would like to say that hydrodissection and nuclear rotation are a must in PSE to avoid complications. This is the tunnel floor entry that I made. AC is very stable, not fluctuating. I could do a very comfortable Rexis of optimal size. And then I'll show in two parts, the regular speed and very slow speed. Completing the Rexis, that's a posterior subcapsular cataract, evidently. I'm taking this kind of cannula, which is bent about 2 millimeters at 45 degrees away from the tip. Normally it's bent somewhere there. So you can straighten it and bend there. I'm making space between the capsule and the peripheral cortex. As you can see, I'm not injecting anything, just made. Now I'll start injecting fluid. What does this fluid go? Because it's directed parallel to the iris backwards, the fluid jets against the equator and spreads on both the sides. Actually, you can see movement of the particles on both the sides as in the slow motion, you can see the movement coming up there. The fluid is going along the equator. And then after that, I'll just show you, I'll go to that space. I'll just go a little behind. I'll go to the, you can just see there. I'm going to that space now and inject a very little bit of fluid. I'm going, and you can see the capsular separating hydrodissection. It's less than a drop of fluid. It stops there. Same maneuver on this side. Create a space mechanically between the capsule and the cortex. Go to that and create a capsular separating hydrodissection. This is in a slightly deeper plane. But now, at this point of time, I want to separate the capsule from the peripheral cortex all along. If I push it in any way, it produces a localized traction or localized pressure at one point. Now, what I'm doing is I'm rotating the nucleus, epinucleus, and much of the cortex all around, and prolapse nucleus and epinucleus, both of them into the anterior chamber, bisect it and take it out in my usual way. And this cannula is continuously, I'm taking it a little forward, fast forward. Cannula is continuously injecting fluid. Then as the cortex is separated from the capsule all along, everywhere, it's very, very easy to remove the, as you can see, even the posterior subcapsular cataract is almost floating there along with the cortex. AC is kept shallow or adequately deep. It's not deep at all. There's no pressurization in the anterior chamber. The pressure in the anterior chamber is just little above the atmospheric pressure. There's no bowing backwards of the posterior capsule, and comfortably you can do the cataract extraction by this technique. What are the differences? One is hydrodissection, capsular separating, I put the lens. And the second one is keeping the chamber shallow. Third is ensure that the fluid that goes and separates the capsule from the cortex is not pressurizing the posterior capsule. As you can see, this is a slow motion. I'm reluctantly going and trying to separate the capsule, lift it up from the cortex. This is a capsular separating hydrodissection. Now this is directed towards the equator, so it does not go along the posterior capsule. I'm manually separating. And now rotate it axially, so the tip of it goes below the plane of the shaft here. So now I've rotated it axially. Now the tip is near the equator. I go there near the equator. Now you see a fluid separating entire posterior cortex from the capsule. This is safest. I'm not bowing backwards the capsule by limiting the amount of fluid. It is being done through the main tunnel, so that if there is a pressurization, like a safety valve, it comes out. Mechanical separation. See this, I see any number of videos of posterior capsular, subcapsular cataract. The cortex is not separate from the capsule initially. So all the trouble starts from that point. They're adherent to each other, and your push and pull aspirations, all that will suck the capsule anteriorly. So this is a wonderful technique, and it's a concept which means to separate and act on the most defective portion that's in the posterior capsule, which is about 3 to 4 microns. And this is a slow motion. I rotate the nucleus, entire nucleus, cortex, and many times you can see this is rotating, that's not rotating. So there is, you can see that. I'll show it in the next video. This exact thing that's going to happen. Yeah, this is a classical posterior capsular cataract, or whatever you call it. I'm planning for a toric lens for this patient because of the last ad. You can see here, there's a classical onion ring appearance. There are radial folds, there are spots on the posterior capsule. Anybody would diagnose it as a posterior polar cataract, but look at this. At the end of it, I did a very similar technique. I'll go fast. Did a rhexis. I was not worried about the hydrodissection. That's under topical anesthesia, both of them. Very limited hydrodissection, capsular separating, like that. This is not hydrodissection, this is hydrodelineation. And I've made it to a softer, because it's a softer nucleus, I could divide them into different layers purposefully. And I'm rotating the nucleus, epinucleus, and cortex all together, and everything will be removed. You'll see how the nucleus, so you can see the cortex can be aspirated easily. You can see how I'll stop here. You can see that's a ring there, and this portion comes out initially. It's like a plug. This comes out initially along with your the epinucleus, nucleus, and all the pressure. If you're pressurizing the anterior capsule, all the pressure falls on the central area there and balloons the capsule posteriorly, which is the root cause for the posterior capsular days in these cataracts. You can see beautifully how well, because of the low pressure, you can easily manage, And ultimately, it proves that it's a posterior subcapsular cataract, though clinically it looked like a posterior polar cataract. You can see here, the capsule is absolutely fine. If I pressurize the chamber at any point of time, I would have certainly had a posterior capsule tear in this patient. Yeah. So I would like to appeal and submit the concept that it is not that the posterior capsule is broken by a technique. It is the scenario, environment that happens, a fluidic environment that happens in the area, which pressurizes and bores the posterior capsule. And thinking that it's going to tear, we are not going to do a capsular separating head reduction. That is the cause for more of the tears rather than actual dehiscence of the capsule. Posterior capsule is, of course, 3 to 4 microns in thick. It's a very, very delicate membrane, and it can be torn easily if mismanaged. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your presentation and your thoughts on this. So the 3 presentations, we did not see any posterior capsule tear happening at all. So I'll show posterior capsule tears when they happen. So I'll be speaking on spontaneous rupture of posterior capsule in eyes with posterior polar cataract. But this is something which I learned very recently with my own experience, because I had not seen anything like that in any other videos which I have come across in the whole world. So spontaneous rupture of PC is something which was always, we knew it happened, but what stage it happened, I was not really sure. So until I just went and saw this is the excerpt from the video which I had made for last year's AIOS conference, and where I showed that, the high infusion pressure is the root cause for the rupture of the posterior capsule here. And most of these cases, although most of these cases the phacoemulsification is done, but the spontaneous rupture happened during all other stages except nucleus management. So in all these eyes, except in the nucleus management, every other step, I had a posterior capsule tear. And I've recorded on 120 posterior polar cataracts for the last 14 years. And these were the 4 cases which where clearly it was evident that there is no instrument touch with to the posterior capsule, but I could document a spontaneous posterior capsule rupture in these eyes. So let me begin with this first case. There's a 50-year-old posterior polar cataract male, 50-year-old patient. He's an extremely deep anterior chamber and he's a myope. So I'm using the OVD to fill the chamber. And during this filling the anterior chamber itself, I could notice and document that, the posterior capsule rupture has happened. Even before the anterior capsule is touched, we are not gone anywhere near the bag itself. Just putting the viscoelastic into the eye, the posterior capsule split happened, and it was documented once I knew that the cataract was taken out. Of course, it was managed eventually with a good outcome. But this was the first case which really got me thinking, like, how can this happen? Because I had not seen anywhere in the world that, like, you're putting viscoelastic in the chamber, the pressure is rise, and it can blow out a posterior capsule. But this was my first experience, and then I went back and searched few of my videos. And this is, 10 years back, old video I got. This is a young patient, myope. The nucleus management has been done now until there's no PC tear until now. So what I do is usually come out, fill the chamber with viscoelastic before going to remove the cortex. The PC is very much intact now. I am putting the viscoelastic into the eye. And now I go in with my irrigation fluid. Look at the bottle height. It's kept around 80 centimeters now. So, because I'm so obsessed with not making the chamber shallow, so I filled the chamber with viscoelastic, and as soon as the irrigation fluid kicks in here, you can see there are 2 waves which are happening actually. You can see this first wave and second wave. The first wave is the posterior capsule flit, and the second wave is the split of the anterior hyaloid. So as soon as the irrigation splits, pressure inside the eye itself blew out the posterior capsule. Now there's another case, 30-year-old man. Again, I followed all the prescribed norms here. So the nucleus management was very easy, no problem at all. Now you come to epinucleus management and cortex aspiration. You're filling the anterior chamber with viscoelastic. And as soon as the irrigation now kicks in here again, you can see spontaneously the PC ruptures again. The cannula is nowhere near the posterior capsule, but still the posterior capsule ruptures here. And in the last case, this is, I think I showed in one of previous meetings, the most weirdest of all. The bag is empty now, literally empty. We're going to open anterior capsule, and I'm filling the chamber with OVD, preparing it for implantation of the lens. Now, before I go in and load my lens and come back, I can see that the posterior capsule has opened here. So you can again see equator to equator split is there. This is a classical thing. So all these cases, teach us the common phenomenon that what was the root cause here? It was the raised infusion pressure. So raised infusion pressure, there's no contact with the posterior capsule and it ruptures. But it doesn't happen in all the cases, it doesn't happen in all the eyes. In these patients, I think the common link here was 3 of the 4 patients were young and 2 patients were myopes. I think this is the common link which I could understand. All these patients have a very low scleral rigidity. So the scleral rigidity is the main issue here. So what happens when you have a low scleral rigidity? So in all these cases, there is a high infusion pressure. There's a weak posterior capsule in the PPC. The pressure built up and the PC ruptured. But this phenomenon does not happen with normal scleral rigidity because the sclera, a normal sclera, which doesn't allow more fluid to get accumulated. But however, in eyes with low scleral rigidity, the sclera stretches and allows more fluid to come inside the eye, and it allows the posterior capsule to bow out and rupture. This is one philosophy. The other theory here possible could be the scleral stretch itself will stretch the zonules here, making the posterior capsule taut. And that is the reason why the weak posterior capsule can give way. The 2 possible mechanisms by which it can rupture in eyes with low scleral rigidity, because the sclera stretches, we have got more amount of fluid getting into the eye. It can accommodate more fluid. The posterior capsule balloons out and then ruptures. Second would be there is a pulling of the zonules here because the sclera is stretched, making the posterior capsule taut. That also can rupture the posterior capsule. So both our theories are possible here. But the bottom line here is that, the raised pressure inside the eye is the culprit here. So we need to deal with it. And at every stage of surgery, not during nucleus management, or it can happen even during viscoelastic irrigation. The first time you enter the chamber, you want to put an viscoelastic. Even that time it can happen. It can happen with manual SICS also, because we are going to form the chamber through a side port using a viscoelastic. So one need to be conscious of all these facts. Decreasing the infusion pressure at every stage of surgery, that is the key here, and including the side port hydration. We want to hydrate the side port. Even then you have to be careful, because many times many of my friends are told that, that in side port hydration as well, the posterior capsule can rupture. So what we have learned here is there's one study which shows that the incidence of PC rupture in PPC is more in patients below 40 years. Reason why it's not explained well, but this is the reason what I see is the thing. The posterior capsule in posteropolar cataracts is much more delicate. It is not able to tolerate this force, but in fact, it can even sometimes, if you are working with a slightly shallower chamber, it can tolerate this anatomical structure rather than this. So the principle that you always have to be having a deep chamber really doesn't work so well in posteropolar cataract. So this, you're putting all the philosophy back on its head and trying to revisit. Of course, the best would be for it to be in its normal physiological place. But given a scenario, slightly, PC which is slightly bending forward is less forgiving than the one which is going backwards. This has been my experience so far. So that was it. I think the rest of the discussion, question answer session, will have it. And I'll stop my screen sharing, and then we'll move on to the question answer sessions. So I've got few questions ready here. So let us begin with the first question. Dr. Preeti, are you here? I think you can start your questions.
Yes, sir. How do we differentiate true posterior polar cataract from a pseudo posterior polar? In the sense, a PSC which is looking like posterior polar and a posterior polar cataract with the dehiscence in the posterior capsule. How do we actually differentiate preoperatively? Is there any way?
Okay, I think I'll answer this question. I have some photographs to share with you here. Okay, Dr. Anil Shah pointed out that we have this classical onion peel appearance here. You can see this is a classical onion peel appearance. Dr. Daljit Singh described it way back about 25, 30 years back. And we have these wrinklings as a posterior capsule, you know, and these is a surefire indication that you're dealing with a true posterior polar cataract, not a pseudo posterior polar cataract. And this is what it looks like when you look in high magnification. So typically,
sir.
you know, we see in all these young patients and rest of the cortex, everything will be clear. You have this, but this again, this one same case. But again, this is not a true posterior polar cataract. You can see the other area is clear, but still you have this central opacity is there, but you don't find the onion peel appearance in this. So I think this again is a pseudo posterior polar. It's a posterior subcapsular cataract, but it's not a posterior polar cataract. I think we can, on the appearance wise, I think we can decide on that.
Is there any investigation like UB ultrasound or?
Yeah, intersegment OCT is a great tool to do this. We can really know the presence of any defect in the posterior capsule. But as we know, the OCT requires transparency if the light to go in. So in denser cataracts, in white cataract is not valuable. But in such cases like a young patient with everything else clear, only central opacity, definitely it's the best tool to do it.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. So my second question is like, we don't do hydrodissection in these cases, and the nucleus, there's no nucleus or no nothing to hold on to. How do we prolapse the nucleus out of the bag?
Dr. Anil Shah, would you want to answer this question?
Yes, these type of cataracts are very difficult to prolapse in the antechamber, but you have to literally manually prolapse them by a blunt ball type Sinskey hook, and then you rotate around the epinucleus and you can bring it into the anterior chamber. This is the most preferred method so that you will not cause any pressurized chamber onto the anterior chamber or any damage to the posterior capsule. From inside, you can do a hydrodelineation and also separate the nucleus. Sometimes the nucleus itself pops out in the anterior chamber. That is another way. These are the two ways by which you can take out the nucleus into the anterior chamber.
Dr. Sundaram Shetty, sir, your thoughts?
I think that video I showed almost showed the way to do it. You know, hydrodelamination and hydrodissection together. You know, that whole thing will start sort of emulsifying, you can say. And then if you get one small cleavage, I think you can start injecting the visco into that to, you know, make the endonucleus and the epinucleus come out. You have to do it in an indirect way. As you rightly said, you cannot catch it. So once, you know, half or 1/3 is out, then with the visco, you can slowly make the rest of the nucleus, you know, guide the nucleus to come out into the entry chamber. Then you can visco express it out of the eye.
Next question, Dr. Preeti.
How do you manage the epinucleus, thick epinucleus? That is.
If you have managed the endonucleus, then epinucleus is not so difficult because there is one, you know, the gap in the center. You know, you either visco dissect, you know, in multiple spaces, then the epinucleus starts, you know, falling over onto the center. And that is, once you get it in one you know, quadrant, then it is enough. From there, you can use the visco to, you know, get it out of the bag. Once it is in the anterior chamber, you need not catch it, you just visco express it out.
The problem with visco expression, sir, sometimes we may use excessive viscoelastic, and then we may rupture the posterior capsule during visco expression. So how do we titrate how much you're injecting?
You have to keep the posterior lip always pressed. Yes. The visco should keep coming out as we are doing it. It creates a flow also, so that the epinucleus, softer epinucleus comes along with the visco.
I think that is the most important point here. So because if you just try to do visco expression and you block the main wound, it is going to rupture the posterior capsule here. Always, you know, press the scleral lip down. So you see that the antechamber is still shallow, even though you are trying to visco express, put fluid into the eye. So that is probably the most important tip here would be. Next question, Dr. Preeti.
will multiple delaminations help in these cases, like in SICS, like in FACO?
Yeah, in fact, it does. Many a times inadvertently also it happens, like there will be more than one ring forming. So as I said, it will create some kind of an emulsification there itself, then you have to simply visco some one of the corners of the bag and then, make this soft nucleus come out.
So sometimes when we are delaminating, it's not a clear ring. Like sometimes I don't get a very clear ring. So
Usually, sub-incisional area you may not. So you can use this J cannula and do that, or you come from the side port. But from the side port, you have to be careful because the eye is closed chamber totally. Any small excess of fluid can stress the posterior capsule. So it is dangerous to come from the side port.
So I would say, sir,
One case of yours, Deepak,
Yeah.
the first one you showed, no, you are injecting from the side port.
yeah. But that is the routine way I do. For every case, I do through side port only.
With the posterior polar,
Ah.
it's a closed chamber situation, no?
Yeah. Yes, sir. But yeah, the reason was
Was it was it a cohesive viscoelastic?
Yeah, I used both actually there in that case.
Yeah. No,
Both
this
it was.
cohesive have this, that expansible.
Yeah, they push it more deep. Actually, they create more space. They're
No,
heavier.
that is fine, but they are not. It is dynamic in a sense. They have that expansile property when they are in the anterior chamber, as against our visco HPMC. It occupies the same area, but it is not under tension, meaning it doesn't expand or contract, whereas the cohesive can, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Cohesive
Is
can.
it working
Cohesive
like that
stretches.
on the?
Yeah, cohesive stretches actually.
so why did you use cohesive in that patient?
No,
so
I
that
was using a
Rex-
soft shell technique for him actually. So initially I put cohesive and then dispersive. This was in my learning curve, but that should be the best.
So was it to have a good Rexis or
Yeah,
why-
basically for that. I wanted a very perfect Rexis.
okay.
So that was the reason. But it is not necessary. Later on I realized a dispersive OVD will do the job.
Okay, sir.
So
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. We'll move on to the next question. I think I have few questions for Dr. MSR sir now. So I think what you told, the points are quite valid. There's nothing like that. Few questions for me. The hydrodissection cannula which you used, what was the gauge which you used? It is different. It has got a very short tip here. And what gauge was it? What make was it? And how important to use this cannula itself?
Yeah, it's a 27 gauge cannula. It's what I do is commercially available cannula I take, and imagine that's a cannula that's available. I'll show it on the finger. I forgot to bring one. And what I do is I take a thick bore cannula through which it goes inside, pass it till the knuckle, and then straighten it, and then come to about 2 millimeters and bend it again to 25 degrees. That's about 45 degrees. So these cannulas are available in the market, but they are called hydrodissection cannulas. They're very expensive. I've told a couple of companies to make it, but somehow they say there is no demand for it. But you can make it yourself. Bend it to 45 degrees at 2 millimeters away from it. The beauty of that is you can actually go to the place where you want to do hydrodissection. If I can take, that's the rim of the nucleus, the capsular bag. Initially, I go parallel to the iris. I reach that space. When you inject a small quantity of fluid, it cannot go behind into the lens. What it goes is it traverses on both the sides. When it traverses on both the sides, it'll create a space between the capsule at the equator. You can't see it, but then you can feel by the movements, that ripples that happen there, that the fluid actually goes along the equator. It's a very small quantity. And then
Yes,
go ahead, tell me.
I think, the advantage of having a small tip here is there is less play, so that you can really put it where you want to put it, and then you can do mechanical dissection. That comes to my next question. Because you are very careful to do, you are very, meticulous, or, you purposeful mechanical dissection which you're doing. What is the reason for doing that, and how does it help?
Oh, it helps to separate the capsule and create a plane at which the fluid go. My intentions are to separate the capsule from the cortex, so that later When I remove the cortex, there is no unnecessary pull on the posterior capsule. You see any number of tears, that is because you're going to mechanically pull pieces of cortex from the capsule, and that's the time you break the weak capsule. Here, I'm separating it right before you have any say on that. Then, if that is a cannula, if that is, now I rotate it axially so that the cannula tip directs towards the posterior aspect of the rim of the cortex. So now a small amount of fluid where we can see. You have to have a very good control on your injection of fluid. It has to stop. Sometimes it traverses, nothing happens. If you have kept the main port open, always do with the main port. Never, I don't have a side port in my surgery, so I'm obviously I have to do from the main port. And I see the fluid traveling along. And even imagine there is a tear in the posterior capsule pre-existing in the center. The fluid does not go backwards, it travels across. So my concept is, most of these, somebody took the percentage of 95, 97, 98% of them, there is no tear. Most of the things we presume that there is a posterior capsular tear, and we are very careful. And this very carefulness is the one which lands us in soup. So if you do a routine surgery, do be careful when you're doing hydrodissection. And to manage the epinucleus, there was a question by Dr. And manage the epinucleus. Don't have an epinucleus. Remove epinucleus along with nucleus. My advice is try this out. Do a capsular separating hydrodissection. Do not separate nucleus and epinucleus. Rotate it so that you separate all the firmer portion of nucleus, epinucleus from the thin peripheral cortex. You will have very little cortex left behind, and manage nucleus and epinucleus together so that you don't have the tough epinucleus to manage. These are the 2-3 points I would like to submit. And
Sir, I
throughout
think
the
very well
procedure,
said. I think the message you're trying to give is hydrodissection in a very controlled amount is not disadvantageous. In fact, it can be advantageous. That is your message. And the key here is the amount of control you're going to have to inject. So that is something 99% of the people like us, average surgeons,
no, I would
have it extremely,
Deepak, I'll not support you on this element, because everybody can do it. We're all eye surgeons. We can manage things very well.
So do you suggest us to use a very 1 ml syringe so that the fluid is much more controlled?
See, you're not used to handling a 1 ml syringe.
Yeah, that is a reason.
You use the syringes you routinely use. Do not deviate.
But how do we know how much fluid we are injecting? It is very difficult to.
Visible feedback, madam. You do it slowly. I can run the video again if you want to see. The amount of fluid is very less.
We can see the slow wave flowing there. Can we stop it at half of it and then maybe stop it there and maybe go from the other side and just do it another half wave, and then maybe you can try that.
That's what I did in the first video. The second video, it travels all over.
I could notice that.
Yeah. So I stopped.
Next question, sir. Now you said you don't do hydrodelineation. Agreed. That's a good point, because struggling with epinucleus is a single most important reason why PC tear happens. But in many situations, most of these patients are just 25, 30-year-old, 40-year-old. The nucleus cheese wires, when you want to remove the nucleus, how do you remove it? Because if there is an endonucleus ring, at least something is there to fold and then pull it out. Yeah. And we are scared to do viscoexpression because we don't know, we may increase the pressure in the eye. And the nucleus is so soft. So we are very worried to push more fluid to passively express out the nucleus. At the same time, we are not getting grip. The nucleus which you show, you got a good grip to rotate and move it out. Many times, softer nucleus, you can't get a grip. It just cheese wires there. Now, how do we manage that?
See, there are two, three inputs in that. Imagine that you're not done hydrodissection at all, hydrodelineation at all. No delineation, no delamination. You try that first. You try to turn it bimanually. If you get a good grip of, see, larger the substance, better the grip you have. If you've already done hydrodelineation, you will never get any grip. So keep the entire mass into one and then try to rotate it. And then if it's not possible, then in that case, just like the way you did hydrodissection, you do hydrodelamination and delineation, split it up and aspirate the whole thing. But during these procedures, you ensure that you're not deepening the antechamber. Do it all the time through the main tunnel. Visually, you inspect, never push the posterior capsule backwards. And see, everybody says don't shallow the chamber. And I think if you take the two of them, if you have to shallow it or you have to deepen it, I would rather worry about deepening rather than shallowing. So, but this is where the bulb comes into maximum use. I have a silicon bulb there, which I can meticulously control the amount of flow and meticulously control the amount of aspiration, and then the balancing the two with visual feedback. The entire thing is there's no tactile feedback. Eye surgery is all visual feedback. So you'll have to have a good microscope. And with that, you can almost, I wouldn't say you can almost eliminate the fear that we have about rupture of posterior capsule.
Okay, sir. Now, regarding for people who are used to performing cortex aspiration or epinucleus aspiration through a side port, Sundaram Shetty sir, what would you suggest? Because these are young patients, the chamber will be collapsing, sclera will be collapsing always. The moment you go into the main wound, the everything comes up. So you're forced to go behind to the side port. As my 4-5 cases show, the moment you do closed chamber technique, and if the fluid which is going in is unregulated, then the PC rupture happens because of the raised infusion pressure. Now, what precautions would we take when you're forced to remove the subinterstitial cortex through the side port?
Yeah, the flow has to be, you have to check the flow of the fluid, irrigation fluid, before you take the IA cannula inside. You know, you observe and see how often, how many drops you want the flow to come. Or if you are in doubt, you actually close the irrigation and you put visco and form the AC and deepen the bag, and you aspirate that dry, so that you have that much or less it will become. It will not become more.
Yeah, that's a good point, sir, actually, because at least the infusion is, what is there inside. It cannot be more than that when you are doing through a visco aspiration. That's a good point. Yeah. Dr. Anil Shah, sir, are you there? You said raised an issue that Blumenthal technique is to be avoided in this scenario. Can you just highlight how why it is dangerous or why it has to be avoided? Dr. Ravi Kulkarni, you are Blumenthal man in our group here. So I would like to have your take, like what is your preferred when you have a postipolar cataract? What is your preferred choice? You usually put AC maintainers. Would you still go ahead and put AC maintainers in this patient?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What precaution? I showed you 4 cases where the raised pressure just blew out. So what precautions would you take when you put an AC maintainer?
Sir, I put the AC maintainer on when the bottle height is around 50 centimeters, or else I'll control it with my regulator. I'll keep the flow very less, and then as sir said, neither be too deep nor too shallow, because it is maintained. It is maintained. When you are entering inside, that will come out, whichever is there, and again flow starts. No problem.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think if there is one indication for Blumenthal technique, it is this case. Because yes, what happens, the problem with the IV pole which you have, you can't measure it how much it is there. And there is a level at which it can't come below a certain point, because there is a rack here. You have to keep it the lowest and then see how much fluid is coming, and then you have to regulate with your hand and then put it there. Because we want a chamber which has to be stable throughout, never too deep and never shallow also. I think if at all there is an indication, I think this is one indication where AC maintenance is going to help us a lot. That is what only thing you should be knowing is that you have to keep the bottle height low and very low fluids. I think it does, because even removing the epinucleus is going to be much more easier. That is what I feel in these situations. But as Dr. Anil Shah said, there are situations where there are sudden deepening of the chamber happens. Even in Blumenthal, if the bottle height is not regulated or the infusion pressure is not regulated, suddenly it can become deep. So the most important principle again is you have to control here your infusion pressure. But only thing is you have to develop some amount of parameter which says that okay, this is what is good for postipolar cataract for Blumenthal. That is going to work very well. Whether it is for SICS or for phaco, this is the always inside the eye is going to make things much more easier. That was what my take. The next most important question to you, Ravi, and Dr. Chetan Sadanand. Chetan, are you there? How would you counsel your patient? The patient has come to you. He's a 30-year-old man, is very professionally very active, and he comes for surgery. And how do you counsel the patient? and prep his mind and post him for surgery? What is your practical tip on that?
Sir, honestly, there is no special this thing for these PPC or anything. Because I tell every patient, all my cataract patients that 99, to the patient's attender, I tell 99% of the time I put the lens in the proper place. But in 1% of the patients, there is a possibility that there can be a problem in the posterior capsule or something like that. I may postpone putting the lens. That is the only thing I tell to every patient.
But you don't
And this-
you don't tell anything special for these patients?
No, sir. I tell always like astigmatism,
Okay.
preoperative astigmatism.
No, that's all
There. Like that, I tell two things, two problems we have. Not only cataract, the cataract is an abnormal case. That I tell.
Okay. You do tell them that your cataract is slightly abnormal? Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Chetan, are you there? Dr. Preeti, you can take the question. How do you counsel your patients?
Sir, I'll be honest with them that they have a special type of cataract that is in a different place, and you may require second sitting of placing a lens or second procedure for your eye, especially the relative.
Okay. Dr. Shetty, sir, do you have anything else to add here?
Well, one thing is there that they are young patients, and if you are putting the monofocal, you have to tell them about the accommodation issue. Particularly if they are within their non-presbyopic age group. That probably is one handicap they should be aware of. Like whatever the vision they were enjoying, that accommodation which may go away. Otherwise, the other risk, as now that we have improvised on so well on the vitrectomy and managing the the lens in the sulcus with haptic capture and all that, I think the IOL placement is not an issue. I think it is okay to take it as one of the cataracts, so not to give any extra this thing, but definitely a mention should be made of the losing the posterior capsule, so that as we were talking about any subnormal vision because of the cystoid macular edema and all that, particularly in patients. The accommodation is one thing I think should be discussed with.
Because I had
So
seen a brochure about few years back. In one of the brochures, they showed that if in case there is a nucleus drop or something in special type of situations, it can happen, then a second procedure is always required and you'll be charged extra for that. That was a mention I read in some of the brochures. So they had mentioned clearly that some special cataracts have this problem. So that was the reason. But because, as you said, that we are now comfortable with dealing with posterior capsule rupture and placing the lens. So nowadays, probably we are not so much emphasizing on, scaring the patients away, as I should say. Yeah,
so
Dr.
what?
You're asking something.
So how about using multifocal and trifocals in these young patients? Do you have any experience?
Dr. Ravindra, sir.
Yeah, I think, see, one of the patient, typical posterior capsular opacification onion ring, was scheduled for a, toric lens. So I put a lot of multifocal lens in this patient, depending upon the patient needs. And I don't think we should hesitate in doing it, as it's explained by Dr. Deepak and Sundaram Shetty. See, my appeal is do your normal technique. You understand that posterior capsule is weak. Explain to the patient. Deepak asked this question, what do you explain to the patient? They have a special type of cataract that everybody agreed. And then do your best on these patients. And, you can always add a word that in case multifocal lenses cannot be implanted, we'll have a standby lens. So you should not, refuse putting a special lens in these patients.
Yeah, I think the message here, Dr. Preeti, is that, you can plan for a multifocal, but always inform the patient that if the things don't go as we have planned, we always have to go back to our monofocal lens, because I still feel that in presence of a posterior capsule rupture, I would not be comfortable in placing the multifocal lens, because although many people could put it, it's an individual choice. I would prefer to put a monofocal lens in the event of a posterior capsule rupture.
So what I meant to ask was, how do these young patients do? Like they will be driving in the night and all that. How other?
I think that is not a part of this question, because that is for any counseling for a multifocal lens. You have to decide on case based, not particularly for this. So that is going to be a discussion altogether. That's purely based on patient's needs, and there are several contraindications for multifocals. But that has nothing to do with the posterior cataract here.
Yeah.
One line of thinking after what Ravindra was trying to explain to us. See, very high percentage of cases which we think are posterior polar turn out to be posterior subcapsular.
PSC.
So if that is the situation, why change the technique at all? Do it the routine way, and you land up, taking away so much of stress on yourself and everything. And that small percentage, which anyway we can handle, if there is a PC rent, we know how
Yes,
to
yes.
handle it. No?
So that's the reason I think we showed this, no, because most people diagnose it wrongly. Unless and until we see something like this in a typical young patient, then usually it is there. But in a dense cataract, some rare old patients also can have this, which we can miss. Obviously, but most often than not, people misdiagnose it for something else. That's the reason why we need to be a little bit careful. That's what I should say.
No, the point I am making is, if it is a true posterior polar, save the PC is impossible almost.
No, sir, it can be spared. It can be spared, sir.
Maybe
So that brings to my question. What is your PC rupture rates in a true posterior polar cataracts? Or you haven't had any?
In fact, my earlier in method, the separation was not complete in an attempt to rotate the nucleus, had led to a severe PC tear. So because of which I have stopped the rotation. But lately, at least I would say about 10 cases since I started doing this phaco, I go with this because now I can handle this endonucleus, epinucleus better with the phaco aspiration rather than in the SSCS. Then what has happened? And they all turn out to be posterior subcapsular. But all the effort has gone into that, removing the endonucleus, removing the epinucleus and all that. In the end, it was an intact posterior capsule. Time and again, it's happening.
That's what I was trying to tell you, that the finding of you see so many videos. If you critically analyze what exactly happened, where exactly it happened, and it's all because surgeon has been extra cautious and avoided doing a hydrodissection, proper hydrodissection, avoided doing nuclear rotation. These two, in my this thing are most important to save the posterior capsule. We avoid thinking that it's going to tear and end up in more problems. The other day also I saw a surgery where the surgeon was trying to put an endocapsular ring and then trying to remove the cortex. Did a marvelous job, but then he had to really struggle. So I discussed with him, why didn't you do a routine technique? Then he went back and saw the video and said that would have been better. A routine video in which you're not going to deepen the chamber and push the posterior capsule and the entire lens backwards in your hydrodissection procedures. That, if you take that much care, I think there is no more scare about posterior capsular cataract.
So the whole point is, if you're doing it in a slightly bigger wound and compress your scleral lip when you're doing hydrodissection, so that there is no buildup of pressure actually, and you're controlling the fluid very well, then maybe you can do it very well. And in SICS is not going to be an issue because we are not going to drop the nucleus anytime. The problem happens in phaco because you're not detected the posterior capsule tear, which has happened during the hydrodissection. The moment you go inside with your phaco probe, nucleus drop happens. That's the reason why the phaco surgeons are so scared about this thing. So that is the reason why I would say it's a failure of the SICS surgeons to not highlight these issues. SICS surgery is very, safe, simple, and most of in average skilled surgeon also the astigmatism control can be very good here because you're dealing with a soft nucleus. So there are so many advantages here because it's not a closed chamber, it's a semi-closed chamber technique, and very few steps required in a very closed chamber. But otherwise, most of them would be open. The chances of PC rupture are slightly lesser in this technique, and also a nucleus drop is non-existent in these situations, or practically non-existent.
How we can solve is even in emulsification, that particular portion, doing your axis and hydrodissection, you can do it through the main port instead of side port. You just try it out. It should work.
No, it is done through main port only, sir. All the hydrodissection procedure usually done through main port only.
Main port, and then do not pressurize the eye into a closed chamber. You remove some amount of viscoelastic from the eye, see that it shallows in the sense the lens comes up, so there's no rigidity or no tension on the posterior capsule. Do a good hydrodissection, capsular separating, and do not do anything else. And try it out, Dr. Deepak. It should work. You will have fantastic videos just on this topic when you start doing it.
Regarding let us stick to SICs here because we are dedicated to this technique now. Let us not bring phaco here. Now, if you want to plan an incision for PPC, how would you do that? And is it going to be something any different or anything? Because we are dealing with a softer nucleus, would you still recommend to go ahead and do a 5 mm axis or 6 mm incision? I would rather say go for a 4 mm incision here because you're dealing with a softer nucleus. Would it be all right?
Shall I answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. 3, 4, 5, anything is all right. It all is age under 35.
Yeah, under 35
under 40.
usually.
I mean, you don't have to go for 5 to 6 mm at all. So you can do it comfortably with a 4 mm tunnel. But the end point is, I look at, by saving a millimeter on the incision site, I'm not gaining anything, nothing, because I don't have to have a closed chamber like in phacoemulsification. What do I gain? Nothing. So as long as I protect the endothelium, that is the limiting factor, and that is the limiting factor for my tunnel.
Sir, most of the issue here is not endothelium, as we know, because it's soft cataract. It's not an issue. The question I'm asking here is, smaller incision again, is it going to raise the pressure more? So because when you're trying to visco express, and that is my concern here. So is it okay now? Because endothelium is not going to be a concern here in the soft cataracts because we are going to pull it out. So my concern is when you're trying to push out the nucleus passively, are we at risk of blowing out the posterior capsule?
Yes, certainly. If you are pushing out the nucleus through a very tight tunnel, and then if you see the chamber deepening, I mean, let us stop it at that point of time. The aim is not to push the nucleus. There are so many ways you can take it out. You can do a Simcoe cannula aspiration of the entire material. Under 35, you don't have to visco express. Repeatedly form the chamber and do a beautiful Simcoe aspiration. So, when you're irrigating, see that you're not pressurizing it. Bottle height is very important. If somebody is just irrigating it, bottle height has to be 40-50, not more than that.
I think the take home message here is that you can use a Simcoe cannula, but only again, watch the amount of fluid which is getting into it. And always keep the scleral lip pressed down so that we don't build up the pressure inside, and avoid the side port in these incisions. Regarding the rhexis size, sir, do you have any comment on this?
Whom are you asking?
Anybody, sir. Sundaram Shetty, sir, would you want to have any plan here?
Here, because of losing the PC, the rhexis becomes very important. So that when you are managing the IOL, where you want to put it, if you even put it in the sulcus, if you are able to capture the optic in the rhexis, the stability and all we discussed last time. So then also it keeps the vitreous also away from the posterior and dental chamber.
I think sizing of the rhexis has to be extremely critical here because we are planning for a bailout situation. We want to put a lens into the sulcus if the need arises here. But there is a problem here. The 5 mm is ideal, but dealing with the nucleus prolapse and epinucleus out through the small rhexis is going to be an issue. Especially when you're not able to bimanually maneuver the nucleus out because the nucleus is very soft. If it is soft, a smaller rhexis takes a lot of time and lot of fluid for us to get the nucleus and the epinucleus out. I think that is a point where I learned that doing an oval rhexis has really helped me. I just show you because I learned it from Dr. Kiranjit Singh, and he used to propose this this oval rhexis. And let me just show, I think I have my, I just will show whether I have a rhexis here. Yeah, see oval rhexis, what it does helps here. This is, this is where my incision would be. The meridian which is here, this is longer than this meridian. So what it gives me is I can have access to this area to either visco dissect the epinucleus or to push my Simcoe cannula or whatever inside and try to move it out, or even push my dialer to rotate the nucleus out. This gives an access, and this has to be through your main incision where you're sitting. It is behind. From this, we can have access to this part of the epinucleus. The epinucleus is going to be a problem for us, and that is the reason why I thought this technique has really, helped me. This has been my now technique for the last few cases which I'm doing here. Now, what has happened here? This is larger diameter. This is a smaller diameter. In the event of a posterior capsular tear, what happens is we are placing the haptic here and achieving an optic capture through this. There is still some amount of support which is available for us. So you can have a decent optic capture even with this dimension here. So your the haptics are going to sit like this. And this is one thing which I wanted to share with you, and it has really helped me. It can work well both for manual SICS and phacoemulsification. The idea is makes the
sorry, where do the haptics stay in the longer axis of the rectus?
No, smaller, sir.
Oh.
So that is where you are sure that the haptic is not going to migrate behind the anterocapsular margin. Your concern is the haptic has to be always above the anterocapsular margin. So you got a smaller rim here where the haptics are placed. It's never going to move down, and then the optic goes down.
Only two oval ones. The capsule is not over the optic, no, because of the wider diameter there.
It is supported very well by this. One end it may not be supporting one meridian, but that is fine. The concern is optic has to be out, and the haptic has to be on the smaller rexus margin, and the optic goes down, and it gives a very good optic capture also. There's no issue with that also as well.
The other point, Deepak, one other point is these are young patients, and then there is an anterior insertion of zonules. You can't make a large rexus. The moment it runs off to the periphery, then
obviously you can't
limit. It will start going to the periphery. It's very difficult to retrieve it because of very strong attachment. Sometimes with the rex utrata forceps, you can tear the capsule, and you can see the zonules attached to it is also getting torn. So don't try to make a very big rexus in these patients.
Yes, big rexus is again difficult to control. And also you may not have a support to place the lens if a PC tear happens here. So an oval rexus is a nice compromise between these two. I think the biggest advantage which I found is the dealing with the epinucleus. You can always go from that area to viscodissect the epinucleus or something else. So that was one point which I learned.
Yeah, I think Preeti asked this question. The epinucleus, the best way to manage is aspiration with Simcoe, as Dr. Chetty said, is almost impossible. Daljit Singh has got a large bore aspiration device, IA device. It's a McIntyre design. He has designed it. It's a huge amount of fluid goes through and huge amount of aspiration can be done. You can try that. It's a straight IA probe. The visco dissection, like you go in front of the epinucleus and inject visco under the capsular bag slowly, not deepening the chamber, through the main port, and you can see that epinucleus comes out into the, that was one good way of removing epinucleus in case of tough situations.
Okay.
There is a question here. Will canoplar capsulotomy be preferred over CCC in post-polar cataract? I think we are losing the advantage of CCC because canoplar, if we have a posterior capsular tear, it's not going to help us in managing it. And also the chance of PC tear could be higher if you have a canoplar technique. So I think it is not advisable to go into the canoplar capsulotomy. I think CCC is, I think, one of the greatest inventions of modern day surgery is the CCC. And it is, the real advantage is seen in such cases where in spite of having a posterior capsular rupture, we can almost manage it as if it is uneventful. Is nuclear rotation necessary before nuclear prolapse into the anterior chamber for post-polar cataract? Dr. Ravindra sir has explained that he could like to rotate bimanually and manage it out. So if you are careful and enough, you can do that. The whole problem was, again, if your nucleus is very soft, you might find it difficult to hold it. So any more questions from anybody? It's open now.
Routinely, I don't rotate the nucleus at all before I deliver it into the entry chamber, even in a normal case. So the rotation per se is not mandatory as long as there is separation of the nucleus from the equator and the posterior capsule.
The rotation I do, sometimes I don't do, but I would like to do in many cases is because I would like to keep nucleus, epinucleus into one mass. If you rotate it at the nucleus, it takes the epinucleus along with it and rotates, and it will create a plane between the cortex that is going to remain behind and the cortex which is stuck on the epinucleus and comes out. Rotation of nucleus, epinucleus as one mass has helped me to avoid managing epinucleus separately. So this is of, in my concern, this is of great use, especially in, it works without that, absolutely fine. But then to get a plane, to know exactly where to, I should lift nucleus, epinuclear mass, rotation is the one which I'm going to remove it. The thing which is not rotating, I'm going to leave behind. Generally, it's a cleavage within the cortex that is left behind, and rotation helps me in identifying what to take it out.
Yeah,
Dr. Anil Shah, are you there? Anil Shah? I think, sir, Shetty sir, you can go ahead.
No, what will rotate will be decided by where you do the hydrodissection or hydro.
No. Hydrodissection separates the capsule from the cortex.
Yes, sir. That's what I'm saying.
And it doesn't rotate there. The cortex, some amount of cortex remains with the capsular bag. The rotation always includes nucleus, epinucleus, and some amount of cortex. These three are involved.
What I meant is, if we have done hydrodelamination instead of hydrodissection, if we rotate only the endonucleus will rotate, not the epinucleus.
I don't do anything else except capsular separating hydrodissection. Intention is that sometimes it becomes a hydrodelineation. But intention is to create a capsular separating that only facilitates cortical removal. I always keep saying hydrodissection helps in cortical removal, not in nuclear management. Nuclear management can be done by rotation and removal.
So any specific tips on IOL implantation in this case?
I mean, once you have removed the cortex, epinucleus, there's no more danger unless you deepen the chamber through. Maybe theoretically the capsule can be, instead of 4 microns, it can be 3 microns, it can be 2 microns. See that you're not going to hurt the posterior capsule by injecting it. Inject it very slowly. I injected, the IOL going like, suddenly into the posterior capsule and pressurizing the capsular bag. All those things, you can avoid that. Apart from that, there's nothing else.
No, what exactly did you want to know?
Like Deepak's strange case. By the time he loaded the IOL, the PC gave
it. So I think IOL, it's not an issue here because you have to be ready. I think most of us will be ready with a standby lens as well. So what was your question?
She was asking any special precaution while putting the IOL.
I think you can put the lens in the bag as well, and the sulcus, if it is there. This is a sulcus fixation. And most of the times, the visual outcomes are excellent in these young patients in spite of a posterior capsule rupture.
There will not be any PCOs.
Yeah, and the visual outcome is excellent. Even the incidence of CMEs is very less in these eyes instead of having an open capsule. I have followed of many cases like this. So it should not be a problem. See, the important point I want to highlight here was the importance of having an optic capture. Now, this is a multi-piece lens. This is a posterior capsule rupture, and I have locked it in the rhexis. You can see the ovalization of the rhexis indicates the haptics are in the sulcus, the optic is inside the bag. So that is the biggest advantage of a rhexis. The lens is centered both, horizontally, vertically, anteroposteriorly, perfectly for life. On the contrary, if you don't have a rhexis, like this has gone radial, and there is a PC tear as well, and this is a PC intact and a PC tear. I have a rhexis margin here, but I can't have an optic capture. I put in the lens, in undilated pupil, it looks fine. But when you dilate and see, you can see the lens is not centered well at all. So this is the same eye. So the importance of having a rhexis, especially in posterior polar cataract, you cannot undermine the importance, because ultimately you are worried about the refractive outcome in these situations. So if you can put them and lock them inside the rhexis, you are going to have it a lot, because you can't lose the rhexis. That's what it is. You can put the lens in the sulcus just like that, but it's not going to stay there for long.
Thank you, sir. Any preferred IOL, or as usual, anything is depending on the financial capacity of the patient we can put.
I think we discussed in the last time for in the bag placement, there's not an issue. Everything could be placed. For an in the sulcus placement with optic capture, my personal preference would be a multi-piece lens, but sir, MSR sir also has good experience with a single piece lens as well.
Thank you, sir.
In an eventuality of loss of these rexes, and a PC pair, what is the way out?
MSR sir.
It depends upon what is the extent of loss of rexis. If it is rexis runoff and you can retrieve it, it's a large irregular rexis, I would like to still go ahead and place it inside the capsular bag. Am I right? Is there a PC tear or there's no PC tear?
A PC tear. It's a
PC tear.
With a PC tear.
Yeah.
If your PC tear is centralized, you could have completed the irregular PC tear into a rexis, PC rexis, posterior capsular rexis, and you've done a good vitrectomy and you've got an intact anterior rexis, you put the lens inside the capsular bag. There's no hesitation. That's best place. And in case the PC tear has run to the periphery to the equator where you cannot place it in the capsular bag, as Dr. Deepak said, put it in the sulcus. That's the other option. If there is a lot of zonular dehiscence, I'm sure that it's not going to stay in the center. I'll rather remove the capsular bag and put an iris claw lens. These are my 3 or 4 approaches that I would follow in such patients. I do not hesitate to put iris claw lens at all if I suspect that long-term retention of the lens, which Dr. Deepak said so emphatically, in the pupillar area, if I see a compromise in that, I would like to go in for an iris claw lens.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sure.
Sir, so most of these cases are soft cataracts. So we usually prefer doing a hydrodelineation instead of a dissection so that you leave a safe cortical matter behind. But in cases of hard cataracts, usually in phaco, we describe that inside-out hydrodelineation where you make a trench and then you do the hydro to be on the safer side. So in these cases, when we are doing an SICS, what would be the preferred technique? If it is a hard cataract and there is a risk of inadvertent hydrodissection the moment you do your hydro procedure.
No, I personally feel hydrodissection is the most important part of any cataract surgery to reduce the trauma to the capsule. Capsule is very friable. That's the play. It's even more friable in case of posterior subcapsular, posterior capsular cataract. Theoretically, I'm not sure. Nobody has gone and measured how much is the corneal thickness. I feel many of these tears are iatrogenic. You've seen any number of, you go and see tomorrow the surgeries, or any number of them on YouTube. You will always see that it's a pressurization of anterior chamber, ballooning of the anterior chamber, pushing the entire lens backwards, putting the posterior capsule into stretch. They are the initiation of the posterior capsule. We've been very, somebody showed these videos on the platform so many times, and we are hesitant to do hydrodissection. I think all of you should go back and do a very gentle hydrodissection, modify the hydrodissection cannula the way I told you. Do it in every case. And I think personally, I think PC tear is a preventable complication and it's an iatrogenic complication, and we can work towards eradicating it. That's what I would propose on this forum. Avoiding hydrodissection is the cause for your problem.
Dr. Sheetal, I think what you wanted to ask was when you can't do hydrodelineation. So
in a hard
cataract. Okay. So you are scared to do hydrodissection and you can't do hydrodelineation because there is no epinucleus. There is entire mass is the nucleus. So
Yes,
if you're scared, I think you should try to make a slightly bigger rexus and directly with 2 instruments maneuver the nucleus out of the bag.
without a hydro procedure.
Without the hydro procedure. When you're doing a manual SICS, that would be the best logical approach, which I could say that, slightly make a oval rexus and then bigger rexus and then pull it out bimanually.
Yeah, I would like to Go ahead, Doctor.
You have to make a little bigger axis, so you have lost one advantage of the carrier. But a big nucleus very rarely sink so easily. So, and particularly so if it is a posterior polar. So the hydrodissection, just like Ravindra did all the separation from anterior capsule and the nucleus so much, and then bimanually you can dial it out.
Yes.
Yeah, see, as I said, hydrodissection, hydrodelineation has nothing to do with nuclear management. It's all about cortical management. You just go and think objectively, and you'll realize that whatever you're doing with hydrodelineation, you're doing with rotation. Rotate the nucleus, epinucleus. It separates, all the layers, removable layers and non-removable layers, and that's it.
No, thank you, sir.
Any more questions we have here?
I think
the hypo, using intraocular pressure reducing medicines like Diamox or IV mannitol, any benefits?
Yeah, I think like especially in SICS, where the moment you go inside the eye, the AC can shallow, preoperative reduction of intraocular pressure adds to the comfort of the surgeon. It's not essential, but because it's anytime you can go and close the chamber, make it convert it a closed chamber technique. But then when you're operating in open chamber technique, like in a hydrodissection is an open chamber technique, and then the cortical aspiration can be open chamber. The nuclear removal itself is an open chamber. The only closed chamber stage in SICS is the capsulorhexis. That's the time it has to be closed chamber. And whenever there's a complication, you need a closed chamber. Other times it can convert easily into an open chamber technique. So you basically divide the SICS into multiple stages of open chamber and closed chamber. That's the beauty of it. Blumenthal, you lose the beauty completely. So Blumenthal is a good technique, but I don't follow it because it's unphysiological, in my opinion. You're pressurized in the antechamber, but it adds to the safety of the surgeon. Then if you keep the pressure little low, not by mannitol, not by Diamox, which are chemicals which go into the body, but just little pressure on the eye. We're all used to very high pressure in ECC, ICC time. We wanted pressure. I should be literally soft. It's in between. I would say about 5 minutes of gentle pressure on the eye, which increases eye pressure to about 25 to 30 millimeters of mercury. There's something called Honan's bulb. We can actually calibrate the amount of pressure you put by that bulb on a sphygmomanometer. So increase the pressure to 25 to 30 millimeters of mercury for about 5 minutes. You will have a very comfortable surgery.
So my argument here would be that I used to use IV mannitol in few of my postipolar cataracts in the early. The one advantage I can perceive is because the vitreous is shrunk down. In the event of a posterior capsule tear, the anterior halide rupture, the chances are minimized because it is still more behind the posterior capsule. That is one hypothetical, conclusion which I have come to. That's one advantage. It is not going to prevent posterior capsule rupture. It might prevent an anterior halide rupture, and you may still have a situation where there is no vitreous collapse, but there is a PC tear, and you can still go ahead and put the lens into the bag. That is one advantage. But Diamox does not have any advantage because Diamox reduces the aqueous secretion. It doesn't shrink the vitreous. So IV mannitol shrinks the vitreous. It is the anterior halide has gone much more behind the posterior capsule. So you have got a little bit more breathing space, and probably you can prevent anterior halide rupture, but not the posterior capsule rupture.
Yeah, whatever you do with mannitol, you can achieve it by gentle pressure on the eye. The same thing, gentle pressure also reduces not only vitreous pressure, but also orbital, the volume. So, yes. But see that you don't compromise on the vascular circulation of the eye. So venous pressure and arterial pressure should not be compromised by pressure on the eye. So the ideal pressure is 25 millimeters max for about 5 to 10 minutes.
I think if there are no more questions, sir, would you should we call it a day?
Yeah.
But I think, I would urge all the surgeons here to record their cases. I can't believe that you don't have PC tears at all. It is just not possible. It looks like, MICS, you don't have PC tears at all. It's such a wonderful thing. Then why don't we propagate it in such a situations? Because I think, the message you try to give is the greatest teacher which we can have is our own videos. You just go and see our own videos. We learned so many things from us. And every surgeon, I think, should record his videos and try to see them. There is a lot of lack of documentation on the part of the SICS surgeons in our country. This is not acceptable. If you want to make SICS in a global platform, you have to document things, you have to photograph things, and you have to project it. See, the world is trying to learn SICS from us, and we are clearly lacking in part of recording and all. We all do so beautiful SICS surgeries, but there is no evidence in what we're doing to do it. So only MSR sir shows SICS surgeries I have not seen anybody else in the whole, because there are, I think, more than 10,000 SICS surgeons in our country, but hardly we see any documentation or recording. That is a very sad state of affairs. That's what I feel. But that would be my, urge to all of you, because we learn from our complications or somebody else's complications. If we don't record them and show, it's a big waste of our, in profession, I should say. That would be my, concluding remarks, sir. You can conclude. MSR, sir.
No, I think that's a very valid point that none of us, including me, not only we don't record surgeries, even I don't record all the surgeries. So many times it starts when I have a complication. Like, you should take a lesson on how to record and how to document, how to edit it. I mean, I was flabbergasted to see you go to your left side of the panel and pull out like a magician. Cases under 40 years.
Yes, sir, that is, see,
it is just impossible for anybody. I'll have to sit and work on it.
Sir, that's the only asset I have. But I feel that is the most valuable contribution you can make to anybody, because I have got recordings from maybe 14 years until now. I still stocked them, and my hard disks are worth more than 5 lakhs rupees, actually, frankly speaking, the amount of hard disk which I have here. But we learn a lot from him. Actually, most of the phaco surgeons record their surgeries, but SICS surgeons don't, because that is the reason why we want to, if you want to put SICS in a global platform, you have to do, record it and document and show.
How did you pull out that picture of the oval rexus with the...
Sir, my desktop only has these videos and pictures, nothing else. My desktop doesn't have anything else, so I can just find that it will be there always.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I know.
The other thing is, we don't publish papers. There are any number of, like, I have documents, every case, every detail I have for last.
Yes, sir. Now the publication is the problem is it takes long time to review, a lot of time. We don't have so much time. But internet is great now, because you just publish in YouTube, at least, whether it is there, you are still the first person to do it. Whether it is reviewed or not, you're still published your technique in YouTube. That's it, fine. So that's the reason why now is the time to publish everything, put everything there. At least you can authenticate that you are the first person to do it.
So I think SICS surgeons are extremely busy. They don't have time to go and eat food. That's a problem. So none of them have time.
Volume is too much.
Volumes are too much, and by the time you finish your day, then you're tired. Where is the question of sitting and
you see, if there are 3 microscopes, maybe 1 microscope has the video camera attachment, and something interesting is happening on another table.
No, I think that is what we should learn. So we should have, everything has to have a microscope, everything has to have a camera. How are we going to teach our younger surgeons? How are you going to teach our younger surgeons? See,
I know, but you all learned without
Yeah, but I don't want other people to go through the grind which I have gone for 15 years, right? You don't have to do that. You can learn in 15 minutes rather than 15 years.
So probably, like no other country you have such a free hand on live patients, that probably the reason also why all these teaching tools are all push to the
Yes,
back
but
burner.
onus is
start
on us
operating on
to
the
minimize the complication. No, sir. You can't just keep on doing the same
know.
complications. Yeah.
That's even now that is the most popular way, hands-on. Everybody wants hands-on.
Okay.
Okay.
So the night session, the attendance is low because they were using other this thing, is it or what?
No, that also I checked. So it's not there. Also, it's not so great.
That's
Actually.
posterior polar. I think they have given up on that.
So I just wanted to show you this. This is, look at this. It looks absolutely like a posterior polar cataract with radiating folds as though the capsule is involved with the tiny white spots all around, onion ring, everything is there. But ultimately, it is not a posterior polar cataract because I went and did the hydrodissection in this patient. I just run through it. See, that is the rhexis, as you can see. It's quite a small rhexis. He's an young patient.
Very true. Lately, that is what I have been doing. I go ahead and do as if it is routine case, and everything turns out fine. In a sense, they turn out to be subcapsular.
So I'm mechanically separating. I did a very small amount of hydrodissection, as you can see here. The first hydrodissection is only that much. Now this is hydrodelineation. I've decided to aspirate the cortex and epinucleus, not to deliver it. That's this is hydrodelamination. I've done all the three: hydrodissection, this is delineation, that's delamination. And I don't have a problem because the AC is absolutely shallow. It's not, I don't call it a shallow, but it's normal AC. And now you can see I'm trying to rotate it. It's not possible to rotate it. Deepak exactly asked the question. I converted the rotation into sweeping movement. It's sweeping movement. To remove it gently, the AC is kept shallower and shallower. I'm not worried about it. So you can see the maneuvers I did. Now there's no pressure on the posterior capsule, and I'm gathering everything into the tunnel, and very little, without deepening the anterior chamber, I'm removing the nucleus. So I'm maintaining the posterior capsule in its place. See, this is a plug, I call it. That's a plug which was abutting to the posterior capsule. So that's got separated now. And now the plug comes out. Yeah, so that's a ring, a plug and a ring, and behind that is the posterior capsule. Imagine you're pressurized in the chamber at this point, the entire pressure posteriorly falls on this area, the tiny area there. That is the one which initiates this is very well documented in this. This ring is now, there's still radial lines. This ring is in the posterior cortex, and central area of the plug has come out now, and I'm not pressurizing the chamber. I'm now aspirating the nucleus and the cortex and epinucleus. Now you see ring is still intact. Now it's getting disrupted. See, you need to have excellent control of infusion and aspiration. This is essential for a good surgery. That's what I keep on. Do not have a continuous run. It's a balance between infusion and aspiration is the one which helps you in managing these patients. I mean, you cannot have a posterior capsular tear unless you pressurize the anterior chamber. That's my take-home message.
So this is a postipolar cataract. This is a postipolar cataract, and the incidence of PC tear can be reduced to just maybe 5%. And that is one of the, this was a classical posterior cataract because you managed so well. If the PC tear does not happen, it doesn't mean that it's a postipolar cataract. It is a postipolar cataract, but you could do it without causing any posterior capsular tear. Maintaining a soft eye throughout the procedure, I think, is the most important step which needs to be highlighted here. And at every step, when you're trying to inject the viscoelastic as well, you're always pressing down the scleral lip so that the pressure was never building up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this can be reproducible in any kind of, so whatever your technique that you're using, you understand the fluid dynamics in the surgery, and you'll be able to prevent a posterior capsular tear. 5% is a very huge number of a posterior capsular tear in whatever you call posterior polar cataracts or posterior subcapsular cataracts is a very high number. We should aim to reducing it beyond that, percentage.
I think, right, sir. I think we'll end the meeting today. I think we had a very good discussion.
Yeah.
The problem is
Thank you
only
very much.
a few of us was learning today. We learned a lot.
All of us, I always keep learning, ending up this meeting with learning a lot.
Ravi, you didn't answer me the question. Would you do phaco or Blumenthal SICS technique in your postipolar cataract?
Hello, sir.
You didn't answer my question.
Sir, I try phaco only, sir. I try phaco only, sir, honestly.
You are in SICS session now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I know, but I try phaco. Then if something goes wrong, then anyway, this is a small, through small one only we can manage.
Okay.
Right.
What is the bottle height when you do phaco?
50 to 60, sir. 50 to 60. I keep it low.
Dr. Deepak, can you tell me if it helps you if you are using a machine which infusion pressure is controlled, like the modern phaco machine versus the standard phaco machines? Would it make a difference in?
Not much difference, sir. I have used both because I have both machines. The study which I did on posterior polar cataract, the results were reproducible even with decreasing the bottle height with a gravity-based system itself. If the compliance of the tubings is very well enough, then it's fine. So it works well. So either you maintain a pressure of 20, 30 or bring down the bottle height to 30 centimeters. You just have to reduce other parameters, it will work fine. So I have, my study was using both the machines. So it was not much of a difference.
Oh, very good. Excellent. So 30 centimeters is what you aim at.
Yeah. Even you're doing the infusion probe goes inside. So that is what you have to use.
But in your earlier surgeries, probably would have used higher pressure.
Yeah. I would use 80. So that was regular. In 10 years back, when I showed the two waves happening, my bottle height, when I saw it was 80 centimeters. It was regular cortex aspiration. The moment I go in, it just stretches and just ruptures off.
Okay. The other thing is patient also complains of pain. Whenever the
of course,
patient has pain because of stretch on the ciliary ring. And what is the incidence of your PC tears now with the new machine?
Machine has not changed, I should say. My thought process has reduced the incidence of PC tear. So before I understood this high infusion pressure was causing my tears, my PC tears were somewhere around 10% in postipolar cataracts. Now it is maybe around 3 to 5%. Presently, still I do have, but it's reduced significantly. Initially it was around 10 to 20% in a classical postipolar cataract before I could realize that infusion pressure is causing this. It took me quite a long time to realize, actually.
Yeah, actually, I never thought, unless whenever there was hard discussion about how to manage a posterior capsular, posterior polar, posterior subcapsular, then only I realized that these are complicated cases. Till then, we never knew that these are complicated. We just used to treat it like anybody else. Now only we are a little more cautious in looking at them. Earlier, 10 years ago, where was this? We never bothered what kind of cataract it was. In SICS, I'm trying to tell you. We became very cautious. We thought too much cautiousness is a cause for problem. Then we evolved into.
Yes, sir. No, to tell that, we need to show some cases where in SICS also PC tear has happened, why it happened. To analyze that, we have to have some recordings available to discuss and understand why it happens in SICS, why it does not happen in SICS. There is a lack of documentation. That's what I'm worrying about.
I fully lack of documentation, lack of studies also.
Yeah. So unless we see it, it's very difficult to believe what is happening, what is there. Okay, sir. I think we'll close today. 20 people are still there with us. Thank you all and have a good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.